All right.
Can you do this?
Let's do it.
Okay. Cool. All right, Carter. So, well, you want me here? Stand
No,
right
this is
there.
good.
I'm gonna see if we can get both. You
No,
want
this
me
is
to
good. This is
see
good.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Carter. These are 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Okay.
So what I'm going to have you do is after each phrase, you're going to repeat that phrase and every following phrase after me,
Okay.
along with the hand motions. And at the very end, I'm going to have you repeat the whole thing back to me.
Okay.
So you can go teach someone else.
Okay. Perfect.
Cool. So these are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Okay.
So first one, say this after me. These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant prayer.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Intentional church planting.
Intentional church planting.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Intentional church planting.
Intentional church planting.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries or the pastors.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Intentional church planting.
Intentional church planting.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Leaders typically come from the local group.
Leaders typically come from the local group.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Intentional church planting.
Intentional church planting.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Leaders typically come from the local group.
Leaders typically come from the local group.
They are lay leaders, not paid professionals.
They are lay leaders, not paid professionals.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Intentional church planting.
Intentional church planting.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Leaders typically come from the local group.
The leaders typically come from the local group.
They are lay leaders, not paid professionals.
They're lay leaders, not paid professionals.
They meet in houses or groups.
They meet in houses or groups.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Intentional church planting.
Intentional church planting.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Leaders typically come from the local group.
Leaders typically come from the local group.
They are lay leaders, not paid professionals.
They're lay leaders, not paid professionals.
They meet in houses or groups.
They meet in houses or groups.
Churches plant churches.
Churches plant churches.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
These are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant prayer.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Abundant sowing of the gospel.
Intentional church planting.
Intentional church planting.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors.
Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the church planters.
The leaders typically come from the local group.
Leaders typically come from the local group.
They're lay leaders, not paid professionals.
Lay leaders, not paid professionals.
They meet in houses or groups.
They meet in houses or groups.
Churches plant churches.
Churches plant churches.
Rapid multiplication.
multiplication. Just like we're doing right now.
These are the
10 characteristics of a church planting movement.
Abundant prayer. Abundant sowing of the gospel. Intentional church planting. Scripture is the authority, not the missionaries, not the pastors. Leaders come from the local group. They're lay leaders, not paid professionals. They meet in houses or groups. Churches plant churches. Rapid multiplication and signs and wonders.
Signs and wonders. Jesus does miracles.
That's right. Those are the 10 characteristics, Carter, of a church planting movement.
Okay.
Could you tell them all back to me now?
Yes. So,
Awesome.
Luke, these are the 10 characteristics of a church planting movement. Abundant prayer. Abundant sowing of the gospel. Intentional church planting. The authority comes from the scripture, not the pastor or the missionary. Leaders come from within the local group or church. They are lay leaders, not paid professionals. They normally meet in homes or smaller groups, and these home churches or churches that meet in homes and small groups plant other churches. and this creates a rapid multiplication because anybody can do it, and with rapid multiplication comes signs and wonders.
Jesus does miracles.
Jesus does miracles. Is
Amen.
persecution one too?
Persecution, is that part of it? It's
Oh,
not
no.
one of the 10 characteristics, but
Okay.
it could be,
Okay.
because most often it is. That's the end of it.
That's beast, bro.
End of
This
it
is Luke Jarbo, straight from teaching from Bruce Carlton to me.
Yeah.
So I'm third generation.
There you go.
Do this.
Thank you, Dr. Carlton.
Woo!